The tension inside the Texas state capitol had reached a boiling point, so thick, it felt like the very air was vibrating with unspoken rage. Governor Greg Abbott sat imposingly behind his grand oak desk, the grain polished to perfection, but his expression was anything but calm. His face was flushed a deep, angry red, his jaw clenched, and his eyes locked onto Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with the kind of intensity that could shatter glass. What had begun as a formal discussion about emergency federal funding quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive political confrontations in recent state history, a clash so raw and unscripted it would soon dominate headlines across the country. The governor's office, once a symbol of authority, tradition, and Texan grit, had turned into a volatile battleground. The enormous Texas flag draped behind Abbott's chair seemed to cast a heavy, ironic shadow over the proceedings. The imagery couldn't have been more poetic, the very emblem of Texas pride looming over a man unraveling in real time, not at the hands of a political opponent from another party, but from a fellow Texan one who simply wanted to help her constituents survive a brutal crisis. Stay out of Texas. Abbott suddenly exploded, his voice thunderous and filled with barely controlled fury. His fist slammed down on the desk with such force that it rattled the frame, and sent his official coffee mug skittering across the polished surface. The echo bounced off the richly paneled wooden walls like a gunshot, momentarily freezing every aide, assistant, and observer in the room. Even the hidden cameras strategically placed by Abbott's team in a misguided attempt to trap Crockett seemed to capture the seismic shift in power that was unfolding. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, not even a blink. The 42-year-old Democratic congresswoman from Dallas, poised and precise, leaned forward with a knowing smile that radiated confidence, and perhaps even a bit of mercy. That single gesture carried the weight of 1,000 comebacks. It said everything without her having to say a word. In that moment, the narrative flipped. Abbott had set the stage to embarrass her. Instead, he had handed her a platform, and she was about to use it to deliver one of the most stunning clapbacks in modern political memory. The footage would soon go viral, first among political insiders, then across major news outlets, and, finally, on every social media platform imaginable. What the cameras caught wasn't just a political disagreement. It was a live broadcast of a generational reckoning, a tectonic shift in tone, power, and strategy. The nation witnessed, in real time, the implosion of a seasoned governor and the rise of a new kind of leader, calm, prepared, and unshakably principled. And it only took 30 seconds. In less than a minute, Jasmine Crockett would dismantle Abbott's arguments, expose the pettiness of his outrage, and deliver a devastating critique that would echo far beyond Texas. Her words, sharp yet composed, would be replayed by cable pundits, dissected by political strategists, and celebrated by everyday Americans who had grown tired of bluster masquerading as leadership. Political analysts would call her response a textbook example of strategic communication under fire. Meanwhile, meme-makers and social media warriors would immortalize the moment with biting captions and viral sound bites. But to truly appreciate the magnitude of that moment and why it sends shockwaves all the way to Capitol Hill, we have to understand who these two figures are. Greg Abbott, the 66-year-old Republican titan, has ruled Texas like a fortress for nearly a decade. Despite being confined to a wheelchair after a freak accident in his youth, Abbott has wielded his disability like a political sword, proving to critics that he's tougher, more relentless, and more combative than almost anyone in American politics. He transformed the Lone Star State into a conservative stronghold, pushing aggressive policies on immigration, gun rights, and abortion. He wielded a $200 billion budget, commanded the National Guard, and had reshaped Texas into what many call the ideological front line of Republican power. His walls were lined with victory photos signing restrictive laws, flanked by conservative icons, giving fiery speeches about federal tyranny. In his mind, he was untouchable, so when a freshman congresswoman dared to question his leadership, his own turf, no less, it ignited a fury within him that even he couldn't contain. Jasmine Crockett, however, was not a political rookie in spirit. A former civil rights attorney and state legislator, she had made her name not through politicking, but through courtroom battles and community advocacy. Her strength wasn't just in her voice, it was in her authenticity. She didn't read from a teleprompter or hide behind vague talking points. She spoke plainly and directly, always with purpose. Her experience as a prosecutor had trained her to thrive under pressure, to read her opponents, and to never show fear. And most importantly, she had learned that when your opponent loses their temper, you've already won half the battle. What made this clash even more consequential was the backdrop. Texas was in the throes of yet another disaster. A brutal winter storm had once again exposed the deep flaws in the state's aging power grid. Millions were without heat or electricity. Families were huddling together in darkness. Nursing homes were running out of oxygen. Hospitals were on the verge of collapse, and citizens were literally freezing to death. It was déjà vu from the devastating 2021 storm, but worse. Federal emergency relief was available. Crockett had fought hard to secure it. But Abbott, driven by political pride and paranoia about federal overreach, was stalling. To the people suffering in the cold, This wasn't just a policy debate. It was life or death. And so, as Crockett prepared to deliver her now legendary rebuttal, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every Texan abandoned in that storm, for every senior citizen who had been left without power, for every child shivering in a trailer home, for every hospital worker forced to perform surgeries by flashlight. What she said next would not only silence a powerful governor, it would awaken a movement. The tension was unmistakable the moment Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett entered Governor Greg Abbott's office. From the outset, the power dynamics were deliberately skewed. Abbott didn't bother to stand up to greet her, a subtle but unmistakable act of disrespect. His posture, reclined and smug behind a massive oak desk, exuded arrogance. He gestured silently to a lone chair, placed uncomfortably far from his position of authority, almost as if to reinforce the psychological barrier between them. Crockett took her seat with dignity, not allowing the insult to register outwardly. She was used to being underestimated. "Congresswoman Crockett," Abbott began, his voice dripping with condescension, "I understand you're here to talk about federal funding for the recent weather situation." "That's right, Governor," she responded evenly, her tone composed but firm. "My district in Dallas has been devastated. Families are freezing in their homes. Children are going to bed hungry. Seniors are stuck without heat or water. The federal government is offering the support we need, billions in aid, to help rebuild and upgrade the power grid. I'm here because my constituents are desperate. They need us to put politics aside." Abbott's face hardened, his demeanor shifting from performative politeness to calculated disdain. "Your constituents," he repeated mockingly. "Last I checked, Congresswoman, they're Texans. And Texans don't need Washington breathing down their necks. We take care of our own, always have, always will." It was a line crafted for headlines, not for problem solving. Crockett knew it. He wasn't interested in helping people. He was interested in protecting his political narrative, the narrative that framed him as a lone ranger standing up to big government, even if it meant letting his own people suffer. The governor leaned forward slightly, as if to underscore his authority. "We don't need federal dollars that come with a leash. That so-called aid comes with environmental regulations and oversight, things that slow us down. We've done just fine without Washington telling us how to run Texas." Crockett's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. She knew this script. She'd heard it before from men who were more interested in posturing than leading, but she also knew the truth behind the talking points. Texas's outdated, deregulated power grid had already failed spectacularly in previous winters. Hundreds had died, and yet, here was Abbott, gambling with lives again for the sake of ideology. "Governor," she said carefully, but with rising passion, "you say, we've done just fine, but my district has morgues that tell a different story. Your energy policies left us exposed. And the worst part, we have a chance right now to fix it. The money is there. The technology is there. What's missing is the will. Why are you letting pride get in the way of people's survival?" Abbott's jaw tightened. This wasn't how the meeting was supposed to go. His communications director, watching from a side room with monitors, frowned. They had planned to rattle Crockett, to provoke her into an emotional outburst that could be clipped and spun on conservative media. They hadn't counted on her staying calm, informed, and devastatingly effective. "Let me be clear," Abbott said, raising his voice slightly for effect. "This is Texas. We don't let outsiders dictate our future, and we certainly don't let young politicians from urban districts lecture us on how to govern." Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not here to lecture you, Governor. I'm here to remind you that the people of Texas aren't props in your political theater. They're real, and they're dying. And if you refuse to act, then I will go to every microphone I can find and make sure they know exactly who's responsible." A silence fell over the room, tense, thick, and full of unspoken realization. The trap Abbott had set was springing shut on him, because while his team had planned this as a moment to humiliate Crockett, she had turned it into a moment of undeniable clarity. She had done her homework, prepared her facts, and delivered them with a calm force that made Abbott look small, petty, and dangerously disconnected. What his staff didn't understand, and what Abbott had clearly forgotten, was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't just some idealistic rookie. She was a lawyer, a fighter, and a daughter of Texas, just like the people she represented, and she hadn't come to beg. She'd come to make sure their voices were heard. Outside, the sky darkened. Another storm was brewing. But inside that room, the real thunder had already struck. Governor Greg Abbott sat behind his desk, his voice initially calm, but layered with a simmering condescension as he lectured Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett about Texas pride and independence. Almost as if she hadn't spent her entire life breathing the same Texas air, walking the same Texas streets, and living by the same Texas values. He waxed poetic about the Alamo, invoking the spirit of Davy Crockett and the Lone Star legacy, as though these stories gave him sole ownership of what it meant to be a real Texan. With barely veiled disdain, he implied that anyone who didn't think or govern exactly as he did must be an outsider, even if they were born and raised in the heart of Texas. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't rattled. She sat up straighter, her voice respectful yet firm. "With all due respect, Governor, I was born in Austin. I grew up in Texas. I earned my law degree from the University of Texas. I know this state I am, this state, she said, each word landing like a gavel strike. That moment marked a turning point. The governor's well-known temper began to surface. Inch by inch, like a storm creeping over a hot summer horizon. His voice grew sharper, louder. His hand gestures became erratic, slicing the air with impatience. Then came the condescension, thick as molasses. You may have been born here, he snapped, but you don't represent real Texas. You represent the radical left agenda that's hell-bent on dismantling everything this state stands for. Still, Crockett didn't flinch. But behind her eyes, the fire began to burn hotter. Her voice didn't waver as she replied, Governor, I represent 760,000 Texans. They elected me to fight for their interests, and right now, they need emergency aid. That's what I came here to discuss. But instead, you're playing political games while my constituents suffer in darkness. The words, political games, hit Abbott like a slap. His voice rose another octave. I'm protecting Texas from federal overreach, he barked. I'm defending state sovereignty, something you clearly don't understand. His staff, standing stiffly near the office doors, exchanged worried glances. They'd seen the governor angry before, but this was something else. This was volcanic, personal. And it got uglier. Abbott launched into an attack on Crockett's voting record, cherry-picking every line item he could use to frame her as a left-wing extremist. He painted her as someone who cared more about social media headlines than real Texans. You come down here from Washington, he snarled, the wheels of his chair creaking as he leaned aggressively forward, thinking you can lecture me about how to run my state. Crockett didn't blink. With respect, Governor, she said calmly, I didn't come from Washington. I came from Dallas, my district, where right now, families are huddling under blankets in July because the grid you've been bragging about collapsed again. It was a bullseye. The room shifted. Everyone knew it, Abbott especially. His power grid failure had become a political landmine, and Crockett had just stepped on it deliberately, daring it to explode. His face flushed a deep crimson, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth could have cracked. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was war. Suddenly, he veered off into questions about the Constitution. Do you even understand federalism? He barked. Do you even belong in Congress? His words now were more about insult than policy. Maybe, he hissed, if you spent less time tweeting and more time reading the Constitution, you'd understand that Texas doesn't need advice from some freshman congresswoman who thinks she's smarter than governors, who have been doing this longer than she's been practicing law. It was meant to crush her, but Crockett didn't shrink. She leaned in slightly, not aggressively, but with the quiet strength of someone who knew she was about to win. Governor, she said smoothly, I've read the Constitution many times, and I've read the federal emergency aid bill. It would help people right now. Have you read it? That line landed like a sniper shot. Abbott, the self-proclaimed constitutional scholar, the former Texas Attorney General who prided himself on his legal mind, had just been publicly and skillfully accused of ignorance. The silence was deafening. His hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair so tightly that his knuckles turned bone white. His staff braced themselves, watching a man unravel who never allowed himself to appear vulnerable, and then came the breaking point. I've had enough of this. Abbott spat through clenched teeth, nearly shouting now. I've had enough of Washington Democrats coming down here and telling us how to run Texas. I've had enough of you. There was a pause, a long, loaded, electric pause. Everyone in the room, staffers, aides, interns held their breath. And then the words that would dominate headlines, late-night TV, and political history for weeks, maybe years. Stay out of Texas. He bellowed it with so much fury that his coffee mug slid off the desk, shattering on the floor. His face was almost purple with rage. His finger jabbed through the air toward Crockett like a spear. Time froze. The cameras his staff had set up to catch Crockett off guard were now capturing his complete meltdown in glorious hide. His staff stood frozen in disbelief, realizing too late that their gotcha moment had detonated in the wrong direction. But Jasmine Crockett, she didn't recoil. She didn't look shaken. Instead, she leaned back, folded her arms, and slow, confident smile of a woman who knew this moment would be remembered, and that she had just won the war without raising her voice. Stay out of Texas, she echoed, her tone cool, calm, and devastatingly clear. Governor, I think you're confused. I am Texas, and I'm not going anywhere. Abbott sat in stunned silence, steam still rising from the wreckage of his failed ambush, while Crockett stood up, straightened her jacket, and walked out, leaving behind not a defeated politician, but a rattled man who had just underestimated the very spirit of Texas he claimed to defend. Greg Abbott sat back in his chair, chest heaving from the force of his outbursts, his face flushed with the kind of self-righteous anger only a man in power could muster. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, betraying the effort behind his performance. Even though the air conditioning in the room was humming at full blast, for a fleeting moment, he looked satisfied like a prizefighter who believed he had just landed the knockout punch in the final round. The room, once buzzing with the tension of a high-stakes meeting, fell into an eerie, breathless silence. His staff stood motionless, stunned, their eyes wide and anxious. No one dared to move. Even the soft clicking of the cameras felt loud in the silence. Those same cameras, meant to capture a political win, were instead immortalizing the exact moment Governor Abbott signed the death warrant on his own credibility. But Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett wasn't rattled. She wasn't defeated. In fact, she was just getting started. Her expression remained poised, calm, and controlled. There was no trembling voice, no shaking hands, only the quiet fury of a woman who had been underestimated for far too long. She had learned through years of courtroom battles that the most devastating rebuttals don't come in the heat of the moment, but in the aftermath, when your opponent thinks they've already won. And that was exactly where Abbott had faltered. He didn't see the ambush coming, but Crockett did. She had been waiting for it with the precision of a seasoned litigator. She slowly raised her phone, holding it in one hand as though she were presenting a critical piece of evidence. "See, Governor," she began, her voice unwavering but laced with fire. "I didn't come to Texas. I never left Texas." Her tone sharpened, slicing through the heavy air. "Would you like me to show you my birth certificate?" She tapped the screen. "Born in Austin, raised in Texas, educated in Texas, elected by Texans. I've never had to cross state lines to be relevant here. Can you say the same?" Abbott's face lost its color. His confident facade began to crack, revealing a flash of panic. His political instincts, honed over years of bitter fights and backroom deals, were finally catching up to the mistake he had just made. The phrase "stay out of Texas" was still reverberating in the room, bouncing off the walls like an accusation. And worse, it was already captured on video. His own team had recorded what they believed would be a soundbite of strength. Instead, they had captured a moment of humiliation that would haunt his governorship. But Crockett wasn't finished. "You know what's really interesting, Governor?" she continued, her voice rising in strength and conviction. "You told me to stay out of Texas, yet you've spent your entire political career trying to keep Texas out of America." Abbott opened his mouth to interject, but she cut him off. With a sharp glance and a raised hand, commanding the room like a courtroom, "Let's talk about that. You've fought tooth and nail against every federal program designed to help Texans. You rejected Medicaid expansion, turning away help for 1.4 million people who need health care. You've filed over 100 lawsuits against the federal government. Why? To block programs that help working families, veterans, students, and children." He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, but Crockett pressed on. "You want to talk about interference? Let's talk about how you interfere with women's rights in Texas. You've inserted yourself into every doctor's office in this state, trying to control decisions that should be private. You've banned books in our schools, silencing the voices of authors, historians, and educators. You've tried to erase families' rights to raise their children without government surveillance. And yet you have the nerve, the audacity to tell me to stay out of my own state." She took a step forward, reaching into her briefcase and pulling out a folder thick with documents. "But we're not done, Governor. Let's talk about who's really from out of state." She opened the folder, flipping through pages until she landed on one marked with highlighter. "According to your latest campaign finance report, 67% of your top donors don't even live in Texas. That's right, our money comes from hedge fund executives in Manhattan, oil tycoons in Oklahoma, and political operatives in California and Florida. Are you telling them to stay out of Texas, too? Or does your concern about outsiders only apply to elected officials who dare to hold you accountable?" Abbott's mouth opened slightly. No words came out, just a quiet, frantic blinking, as though he could somehow blink away the reality unfolding in front of him. But Crockett delivered the final blow like a prosecutor, driving home her closing argument. "You know what I think, Governor?" she said, stacking her documents neatly and sliding them back into her briefcase. "You're not mad that I'm interfering. You're mad because I'm doing the job you won't do. I'm here fighting for the people of Texas. You're fighting against them, and the people are watching." She stood slowly, tucking her phone into her blazer pocket with the same deliberate calm she had maintained throughout the entire exchange. "I came here to find solutions, to talk about how we can help the families you've abandoned. And you responded with hostility and arrogance. But I'm not leaving. I was born here. I was raised here. I was elected here. And I will not be bullied out of my state by a man who's forgotten who he works for." Abbott, desperate now, tried to salvage what little authority he had left. "You can't talk to me like that time the governor of Texas." Crockett turned at the door, offering a cool, controlled smile. "Yes, you are. And I'm a United States Congresswoman. The difference is I still remember that I work for the people, not the other way around." Then, without another word, she opened the door and walked out head high, spine straight, leaving behind a room that felt like the aftermath of a courtroom reckoning. The silence that followed was oppressive. Abbott's staff stood awkwardly, avoiding eye contact, unsure whether to speak or simply disappear. The governor sat still in his chair, staring at the door as if expecting her to walk back in. His mouth moved slightly, but nothing came out. Finally, his chief of staff broke the silence. "Governor, should we release the footage?" Abbott looked up slowly, dazed. "What footage? The cameras we set up? To frame her as an outsider?" "They caught everything." Abbott turned his gaze toward the nearest camera. then looked down at the stain where his coffee cup had fallen during the argument. "Turn them off," he said softly. "Turn them all off." But it was already too late. The footage was already being copied, shared, uploaded, and soon the entire country would see what happened when Governor Greg Abbott tried to banish Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from the very state that raised her. A moment meant to showcase political dominance had instead become a viral symbol of its collapse. The fallout was immediate and explosive. The leaked footage first surfaced on an anonymous Twitter account, but within minutes it went viral across every major social media platform. What was supposed to be a moment of authority for Governor Abbott turned into a nationwide spectacle and, not in the way he had envisioned. In less than an hour, the hashtag #StayOutOfTexas was trending, but instead of rallying support behind the governor, it had become a national punchline. Users across the country, including Texans themselves, were mocking Abbott's outburst and praising Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's piercing rebuttal. The video had been expertly edited, whether by chance or decided, to create a 30-second supercut that packed an emotional punch. It opened with Abbott's angry snarl, "Stay out of Texas," and ended with Crockett's now iconic mic drop line, "I work for the people and I always will." Within the first 6 hours, the clip had racked up over 5 million views. Progressive influencers amplified it with captions like, "This is what happens when a bully meets a woman who knows her power," and "Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in holding corrupt leaders accountable." But what no one expected was the wave of bipartisan support that followed. Conservative Texans, many of whom had voted for Abbott, began chiming in with surprising solidarity. A viral tweet from a Republican voter in Houston read, "I may not agree with her politics, but Crockett stood up like a real Texan. Abbott sold us out to his out-of-state donors." That tweet alone got over 100,000 likes. Then came the memes. Someone turned the moment into a looping gif of Abbott's coffee mug slipping from his hand, captioned, "When you realize you messed with the wrong woman." Another meme showed Crockett gathering her notes with surgical calm, text overlaid, "That's how you handle a tantrum." On TikTok, creators went wild. Dramatic edits featuring slow-motion clips, cinematic music, and sharp text overlays exploded in popularity. One montage of Crockett's best lines hit 12 million views overnight. Teenagers and 20-somethings who had never heard of either politician were suddenly calling Crockett a political legend. By morning, the mainstream media had picked up the story. CNN ran a headline that read, "Texas Governor's meltdown backfires spectacularly." MSNBC's Joy Reid played the exchange 3 times on her show and called it one of the most devastating political witnessed. Even Fox News struggled to spin the narrative in Abbott's favor. While they attempted to defend the governor, several hosts looked visibly uncomfortable, especially when forced to replay the moment he lost his composure. The New York Times ran a full front-page spread titled, "When Stay Out of Texas Backfired," analyzing how Abbott's desperate display of dominance had instead revealed a man unfit to lead. But the real damage came from local coverage. The Dallas Morning News, typically neutral on Abbott, published an editorial stating that the governor's conduct was unworthy of Texas' highest office. Meanwhile, the Houston Chronicle didn't hold back. "Abbott embarrassed the state. Crockett reminded us what true Texas values look like: strength, service, and grace under fire." Abbott's team went into full crisis mode. They tried to reframe the video, claiming it was taken out of context. They released statements insisting that the governor was merely defending Texas values. But the full footage was out there, and it told the truth in crystal clear HD. Abbott had lost control. Live and unfiltered, and no press release could spin that away. Even worse, Abbott's own tweets became a source of ridicule. He tried to double down, tweeting, "I will always defend Texas against federal overreach, no matter who doesn't like it." Thousands of users immediately clapped back with responses like, "Crockett is from Texas, genius, and you're defending donors, not Texans." His staff scrambled to book him on conservative talk radio shows to control the narrative. But even the friendliest hosts couldn't avoid the elephant in the room. They asked, again and again, "Why did you lose your temper? Why attack someone trying to help storm victims?" The breaking point came during a press conference meant to focus on a new infrastructure bill. Instead, every reporter in the room zeroed in on the Crockett exchange. After the 5th question about his "stay out of Texas" remark, Abbott abruptly ended the conference. Cameras caught him storming off, clearly rattled, and that moment became yet another viral clip. While Abbott stumbled through damage control, Jasmine Crockett soared. Her office was overwhelmed with media requests. Invitations to speak at conferences, universities, and civic events flooded in from across the country. She appeared on CNN with Anderson Cooper and delivered yet another powerful moment. "I went to Austin to help Texans who are hurting," she said calmly. The governor responded with a tantrum that says everything about the difference between us. When Cooper asked if she regretted the confrontation, Crockett didn't flinch. "I regret that it took a public meltdown for the governor to finally agree to accept federal storm relief. But sometimes, speaking truth to power means making power uncomfortable," and she was right. Within days, Abbott reversed his position and quietly accepted the federal emergency aid complete with the environmental provisions he had loudly rejected. His office claimed it was always part of the plan, but no one believed it. Everyone knew that Crockett had forced his hand. The impact was seismic. Abbott's image as a tough in-control leader crumbled overnight. Voters and donors alike began to question whether he still had what it took to lead the state. Meanwhile, Crockett's stock rose sharply. Political insiders started calling her a future Senate candidate. Some even floated her name for governor. In the end, what began as a confrontation behind closed doors became a defining moment in Texas politics. One leader lost his cool and exposed his insecurities. The other stood tall, spoke calmly, and walked away with the state hand, possibly the nation watching. When Governor Greg Abbott tried to assert dominance over Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett during what was meant to be a routine meeting, he may have underestimated both the moment and the opponent. What was supposed to be a political ambush quickly backfired, flipping the narrative and casting Abbott not as the seasoned leader he tried to portray, but as an out-of-touch relic of a fading political era. Crockett, on the other hand, emerged from the encounter not only unshaken but elevated, transformed into a rising national star. Abbott, whose ties to wealthy out-of-state donors have long drawn criticism, suddenly found himself painted as the outsider in his own state. His condescending remark telling a native Texan like Crockett to stay out of Texas sparked outrage across the political spectrum. It exposed a deep generational and cultural divide within Texas politics. Abbott represented the old Republican establishment, older, overwhelmingly white, and increasingly disconnected from the diverse, dynamic population that now defines the state. Crockett stood in stark contrast, symbolizing the new Texas, young, unapologetically diverse, and unwilling to be silenced by outdated political tactics. The confrontation was more than just a moment. It was a political earthquake. Within 48 hours, the video of Abbott's meltdown and Crockett's poised response had gone viral, racking up millions of views and igniting discussions from college classrooms to cable news panels. National Democratic leaders took immediate notice. Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office called to arrange a meeting. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer personally invited Crockett to speak at a major Democratic fundraiser in New York. Even more telling, sources within the White House confirmed that President Biden had seen the footage and was reportedly impressed by her composure and confidence. Talks began about involving her in key administration initiatives, and whispers emerged about supporting her if she chose to run for statewide office in Texas. Meanwhile, Abbott's carefully curated image as a competent and unflappable leader began to unravel. Late-night comedians lampooned his outburst. Editorial cartoonists had a field day sketching the wheelchair-bound governor flinging objects while Crockett calmly took notes. In the media and among voters, the question loomed. If Abbott couldn't handle a respectful disagreement with a member of Congress, how could he be trusted to govern through real crises? Polling data reflected the shift. For the first time in years, Abbott's approval ratings began to dip, especially among suburban women and younger voters, key demographics in any statewide election. Many described his behavior as bullying, unprofessional, and emotionally unstable. It was a stark contrast to Crockett's steady demeanor and focus on facts over fury. While Abbott ranted, she responded with poise and precision, using his own aggression to highlight the very issues Texans were growing tired of. Performative outrage and a lack of meaningful leadership. The incident didn't just expose Abbott's vulnerabilities, it redefined Crockett's political brand. She wasn't just a freshman congresswoman anymore. She was a force. Communication experts dissected her performance in academic journals and seminars, praising her ability to stay calm under pressure, deploy facts strategically, and flip a hostile narrative on its head. Political science professors screened the video in classrooms as a case study in modern leadership and media influence. Crockett hadn't just survived a political ambush, he had mastered it. More importantly, this moment catalyzed a larger conversation about the future of Texas politics. For decades, Texas had been solidly red, a Republican stronghold built on traditionalism and conservative values. But Crockett's rise and Abbott's very public stumbles signaled a turning tide. Changing demographics, grassroots energy, and a hunger for authenticity were creating new openings for Democrats. Crockett wasn't trying to mimic Republicans to win votes. She leaned into her identity, her values, and her roots, showing that being Texan meant helping your neighbor, standing up to bullies, and speaking truth to power. Ironically, the very cameras Abbott had set up to capture Crockett's supposed embarrassment instead recorded his own undoing. That footage, raw and unfiltered, became one of the most talked about political videos in recent memory. At press conferences, Abbott could barely escape its shadow. Reporters asked if he planned to tell any other Texans to stay out of their home state. His forced smile couldn't hide the humiliation. What this confrontation ultimately proved is that in the era of viral media, authenticity and emotional intelligence can defeat money and political machinery. One calm, confident response from Crockett did more to reshape public opinion than months of campaign ads ever could. Her performance reminded voters what true leadership looks like. Not loud, not vengeful, but steady, principled, and deeply rooted in service. Months later, historians and analysts were still referencing that meeting as a pivotal moment in Texas's political evolution. It may have started as a confrontation, but it ended as a coronation. Crockett's rise and Abbott's fall weren't just about personalities. They were about the kind of leadership voters want moving forward. Younger, bolder, more inclusive, and utterly unafraid. So the question remains, was this just a viral flashpoint or the beginning of a real political transformation in Texas? All signs point to the latter. And as long as leaders like Crockett continue to speak up and show up, the Lone Star State's future might look very different than its past. If you found this breakdown powerful and eye-opening, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our coverage of the moments that are rewriting American politics. And don't forget, drop your thoughts in the comments. Did Crockett just outmaneuver the governor of Texas on his own turf? Or was this just one viral moment in a long game of political chess?